Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Hughes, and I am the Associate Director of Program Quality Assurance at NAMI New Jersey. Welcome to NAMI New Jersey's Multicultural Conversations webinar series, proudly sponsored by Immigrant. For 20 years, Immigrant has been committed to the health of all New Jersey communities through strategic partnerships with organizations like NAMI New Jersey. Immigrant is actively addressing social determinants in a conscious effort to minimize health disparities for underserved and minority populations. NAMI New Jersey is committed to serving New Jersey's diverse communities. We represent the interests of all people affected by mental health conditions, regardless of age, gender, race, or ethnicity, national origin, religion, disability, language, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, or gender identity. With these conversations, we aim to bring more awareness on the relationship between mental health and culture. Today's topic is academic pressures and mental health among immigrant families. We are honored to have our distinguished speakers, Diana Chao and Dr. Dingra, joining us today. Diana Chao is a 22-year-old first-generation Chinese-American immigrant from Southern California. Diana founded Letters to Strangers when she was a sophomore in high school after bipolar disorder nearly ended her life. By beginning to heal through letters, she discovered that writing is humanity distilled into ink. Today, Letters to Strangers is the largest global youth-for-youth mental health nonprofit, impacting over 35,000 people on 6 continents and publishing the world's first youth-for-youth mental health guidebook for free. For this effort, Diana has been named a 2020 L'Oreal Paris Woman of Worth, 2020 Princess Diana Award winner, and Oprah Magazine's 2019 Health Hero. As part of Adobe Integral Class of Global Top Talents, Diana seeks to further the intersection of creativity and social impact through conceptual photography. Her Minority Mental Health Month self-portrait series went viral with 2+ million views, and she gives workshops and speeches on youth mental health. But most of the time, she is a geosciences senior at Princeton University trying to wake up for class on time. Pawan Dingra is a professor of American Studies and faculty equity and inclusion officer at Amherst College. He is a former curator at the Smithsonian Institution. His bylines include the New York Times, CNN, and more. His most recent book is Hypereducation: Why Good Schools, Good Grades, and Good Behavior Are Not Enough. He co-authored with Professor Robin Rodriguez, Asian America, Sociological and Interdisciplinary Perspectives. He and his work have been profiled in the Washington Post, NPR, Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, and many other venues. An award-winning teacher, he also appears in the documentary on Indian American spelling bee kids, Spelling the Dream. He has been the chair of the board of South Asian American Digital Archive. He has been the department chair and hold tenured position at Tufts University and Oberlin College. Diana and Dr. Dingra, we are grateful that you are here, and we look forward to hearing your perspective on this topic. So let's start off with a poll to get to know our audience, and then we will start the conversation. We bring up the first poll question, please. Okay, so the first poll question: are you a parent of a student? Just trying to get to know our audience a little more here. All right, we'll give everyone 5 more seconds. Okay, we can end the poll. So it seems like we have about 61% of people are parents of students and about 39% aren't. Okay, sounds good, thank you. Can we have the next poll question, please? Are you currently a student? All right, so we can end the poll. It seems like 82% of our audience is not a student, but 18% is. So it seems like we have a pretty good mix of parents and students. All right, one more poll question, please. Have you or your child ever experienced stress or pressure from academics? All right, 5 more seconds. All right, we can close the poll. So it seems like 97% of you have experienced some stress or pressure from academics. So we hope today you can gain some perspective and understanding about academic pressure and possibly how to cope with it. So we can close the polling and we are going to start our conversation with our panelists. All right, so let's start off. I'm going to start off with Dr. Dingra today. I want to ask you a question about your book, Hypereducation. So where does academic pressure come from? In your book, you discussed the root cause to immigrant families' obsessions over academic achievements. Can you share your insights on this a little bit?
Yes, gladly. And first, let me just say thank you for hosting us today. And thank you for those of you who are spending part of your afternoon with us. We really appreciate it. And I was glad those poll questions went up, because when 91+% of the people feel that they've been suffering some kind of stress or anxiety around education or around, and growing up, then you are exactly the right audience for us to be engaging with. But you're not alone, right? So, many people across the country, regardless of their background, experience stress around education and trying to achieve academically. It is becoming a problem for mental health experts in schools and outside of schools. I talk to mental health experts as in researching the book Hypereducation, who spoke about third graders, right, feeling stressed and worrying about because of academics, because of standardized tests, or because of pressures they're hearing from their families, even inadvertently. And immigrant children in particular can experience this because immigrant parents often come to this country either because they themselves were able to attain a high education and come to this country on a work visa, or they're hoping that they come to the country hoping their kids can take advantage of an education system that seems more open and can give them a better opportunity. Either way, kids in some ways carry the brunt of why we come into this country, and it can add to the stress, again, like all kids are going through. And it also gets more intensified when parents focus on, what were your grades today? How are you doing on this test? Make sure you study, study, study. We're very well-meaning as parents, but some of the messages we give our children can inadvertently cause them problems that we don't mean to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dingra, for that perspective. So Diana, I want to kind of hear on the other side of things, sharing your personal experience of academic pressure throughout your life. So would you consider yourself growing up in a typical immigrant family in terms of parental pressure over academic performance?
I think I was a little bit of a unique case in that my parents were not the stereotypical tiger parents, but I think they showcased their expectations and pressures in different ways that ultimately led to academic pressures imposed on myself. So my family grew up living below the poverty line, and we had a small family food business that I think a lot of immigrants can relate to. And for me, I think a lot of the pressure came from wanting to, after seeing all of the pains and struggles that my family was going through, wanting to allow for some alleviation of that pain. And so because the only ways that were available to me at the time that I knew of were working and education, I tried really hard to do both. And so the pressure became more from, I think, the cultural aspect of feeling this debt to my family, and that in and out of itself transitioned and took on a form of academic pressure because that became a way for me to extract worth and value from myself that I can then provide in respect to my family, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like it was a combination of kind of the cultural implications as well as the stress from academics that come with any academic day-to-day kind of work, especially being at a university. Absolutely. Thank you. So Dr. Dingra, how can parents and family members support their youth's mental health when it comes to academic pressure?
Yeah, I think this is a central question, and I spent a lot of time talking with families about this for the book. And there's a few things we can do, right? First of all, we don't want to pretend that academics doesn't matter, because that would be in effect, misleading or deceiving our kids, or at least not representing what we believe. And that's not helpful, because they'll read through us, right? They're not naive. But we don't want to focus on outcomes as we're focusing on achievement. That is to say, we should be focusing on effort and certain expectations around hard work and commitment, and trying to support our children as they work through their academics. And that's different than asking about grades per se. I make a point, and I learned this from the people I interviewed, to really emphasize, are you studying for this? Are you studying for that? But then after the test, I don't bring it up. I don't ask about the grades, right, the outcomes. Right, I just applaud them, and we celebrate after the test is over, before the grade even comes in, right? And trying to communicate that. Other things I learned from parents that I write about is trying to make it fun. Academics can be fun, even if the child does not enjoy it. Parents told me stories of playing catch in the backyard with their kids, and before throwing the ball, they would ask a question, how to spell a word, or how to, because I talked to a lot of parents whose kids would do spelling bees, or do a math equation. A simple math thing in their head, or whatever it might be. When your kid is tying their shoes, right, to go outside, when your kids are having dinner with you, what do they talk about? Listen to them, and then try to find ways to connect what academic concerns to what they care about, so that it becomes less of an onerous or sense of homework, and more about how they can connect academics to their everyday preferences and cares.
That's really great, Dr. Dingra. So it sounds like your focus in what you're saying is focusing on the positive. So trying to identify strengths in maybe their children and saying that they're hardworking or committed, or provide that support as a parent. And also, have that relationship with the child, so that during dinner, like you're saying, you can kind of have that back and forth conversation, and it might encourage them to talk more about their academics.
Real quick, yeah, on that same point. I spent time with a family in their kitchen as they were kind of doing some homework. They were in an after-school math class, and the mother was with the child, and the mother was just like commenting on the child, making sure the child understood the after-school math homework and everything else. But there was no lavish praise and no like disgruntledness if the child didn't get it right. Just kind of keep it even keel, and that's a kind of way of telling our kids, we're here to support them. It's going to be okay. And they can kind of internalize that and learn that for themselves.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Diana, I have a question for you. So what are the various familial pressures faced by Asian American students, and how can they be addressed?
I think, there's going to be more and less of different components of it, depending on a person's context and situation. So like I mentioned before, for my family, a lot of it was financial. Like I come from the poorest province in China, and basically very, very few people leave our village, much less the country. And so there was that sort of burden and need to do something for the sake of the people back home. And I think because of the emphasis on, our cultural networks, and also even aspects of just filial piety, etc., there is that pressure that's integrated to academic needs, because academic success is traditionally viewed as, the way that we measure success as a whole, even tying back to historical times, like in China with the imperial exams, which allowed for people to really truly be part of a meritocracy in many senses that we don't see the likes of today. And so I think that's a big part of it. But another thing is with the model minority myth, you have a lot of students, especially of Asian American heritage, who struggle with wanting to do well in school, but then feeling like whatever efforts they put in are dismissed by their peers or even their teachers as just like, oh, well, of course they did well. It's because they're Asian or whatever else. And I've had many teachers say that to me. And it just sort of makes you feel like, what's the point of working hard when everybody just acts like it doesn't matter. And similarly, they might apply stereotypes. Like a lot of people think that Asian Americans are just better at like STEM because we tend to pursue scientific careers more. And even though I did super well and was like far above everybody else in my history class in high school, my history teacher told me that she thought that because I'm more of a physics and science kid, that I shouldn't be recognized for my history achievements, which felt very random to me. Like it didn't seem like a legitimate claim. And so a lot of these just interplay also with like your own sense of identity when you feel like, oh, well, then maybe if I don't do as well, maybe I'm not even Asian enough, whatever else. So there's just a lot of different cultural clashes and identity clashes.
Can I add to that really quickly? And I say that
Absolutely.
that was really poignant, Diana, and thank you for sharing that. And I talked to a lot of teachers who kind of echo similar points around, our Asian American students, they're kind of, it's like a sense of being natural at something, right? And even saying that sometimes the Asian American students study too hard, work too hard. And they're trying to be well-meaning and caring about the students, but they're kind of playing into some of the stereotypes that we're trying to battle against. There's a lack of information, which is a real problem.
Absolutely. And you're both talking about a lot of different types of stereotypes. Do either of you can jump in on this, have any advice or pointers on how to address that? How can students talk to teachers when they're feeling this way? Or how can parents advocate for their children?
Thank you, Dr. Dingra. And also thank you, Jennifer, for the question. I think it's tough because at the end of the day, it requires a sort of internal recognition of your worth separate from the stereotypes that are being applied to you. And that can be very difficult to achieve when you're like in a, growing teenage sort of situation. But I think for me, what helped a lot was I think that I had a lot of exposure to different hobbies and interests that were not considered stereotypically Asian. And so, for example, I played the bagpipes in a Celtic rock band in middle and early high school, which is very random. But I think like, doing these very random things that like even my parents were like, what the heck is going on? It helped me sort of just realize that like, you know what, I do things because I like them. I don't really care at the end of the day what other people think. So I think, taking that time to diversify the things you expose your kids to and that you expose yourself to if you're a student, even if it's something that you might otherwise have dismissed as just like, oh, I'm not that interested in it, giving yourself that chance, I think helps allow us to better break down that internal mind barrier between expectations and stereotypes and who we internally are.
Yeah, I think that's really well put, and I'd love to hear your bagpipes by one day. But I think, so what you're saying, Diana's saying, is that we kind of need to ignore stereotypes and be ourselves for our own sake. I think is the most important thing. But doing so also helps create a better image for ourselves to others. I'll just add that part to it. And so that happens, so Jennifer, your question was, how do we get our teachers to see us differently? And as parents, I think part of our job is to communicate who our kids are to teachers. I was really surprised by how little conversation parents and teachers had about the student, about their child, right? It's the teachers talk to students, parents talk to teachers, but there's never really a three-way conversation, intentionally or not. The other thing is I talked to some college admissions officers at some elite universities as part of this book, and they would talk about how Asian students who kind of fit a stereotype of a profile, if you will, when they're applying, aren't doing themselves any favors, right? And so it's important to break out of stereotypes for your own sake, and that's the most important thing, and Diana spoke to that. But in addition to that, it doesn't even serve Asian Americans necessarily to fit a stereotype. So for many reasons, we should be thinking about, what do I really like to do? I remember one college admissions officer saying, if a student is doing an activity because they think it's going to get them into college, then that's a mistake. And instead they should do it because they would be doing this even if there was no college admissions process on the horizon. And so parents need to kind of realize that and encourage kids down particular pathways that resonate with them.
Yeah, to sort of add on to that, I think like what I've seen from my peers as well as my experience is that the typical activities associated with an Asian American student applying for college include playing tennis, going to Kumon, or like doing like some um, like tutoring thing after school, math or science competitions, playing piano or violin, maybe doing classical dance in your traditional format, things like that, like, or like speech and debate. Like there's like a set of things that they just expect, and I'm not saying that like, you know, you shouldn't do them if you like them, because I think that it's we shouldn't have to restrict ourselves. But it is, but I do see a lot of parents who will be like, oh, my kid is doing XYZ, and then their friend is like, oh, you know what, I should get my kid on that too, and then they just like copy and paste what each other do. And I'm like, have you asked your kid about if they want to do this? So that's kind of how I feel about it.
I talked to parents whose children are like, spelling bee champions, like script spelling bee champions, or are math counts, finalists, and the kids and the kids themselves, and the kids who are doing this because they like it, you can tell a difference, right? And not that you have to start off liking it, sometimes parents will put them in at the young age, but if kid does not start liking it and care about it on their own, that's a sign to be thinking about it differently.
Yeah, I love what you both said about that. Like really finding what you want to do and find hobbies that interest you. And even it sounds like you're saying going outside of the box sometimes too, and that it's okay to do that. And I think that's a really good message to send. So let's move to a different question. All right, so Dr. Dingra, would you say there's a difference in the amount of pressure children experience depending on their age and gender?
Actually, I don't really think so. I think boys and girls, and I met tons of them professionally and as well as my personal experiences, experience pressures relatively similarly, right? I think it's kind of a myth to say that Asian parents only want their boys to somehow focus on education and the girls they care less about. They may put pressure on them for different reasons, but the pressure is still kind of equally felt. And sometimes the firstborn child kind of carries the burden of having to get educated and achieve for the family. But the secondborn child sometimes carries the burden of having to live up to the expectations set by the firstborn child. So in many ways, these pressures, I think, are shared.
Thank you. And I think that's an important message, that it is shared, that it's not a specific age, a specific gender, it's for everyone.
I will say that sometimes there are elements of gender bias at play, especially if your family comes from more traditional contexts like mine does. I often had to fight a lot harder than my brother in my educational context in order to prove that my efforts were worth noticing. Like it often felt like I had to achieve at higher levels just for the same amount of recognition and appreciation. So I think for some people there is that component as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Diana, for sharing that. What coping strategies do you think, Diana, have you used to overcome academic pressure?
Yeah, I think like I mentioned before, really discovering hobbies of my own helped a lot. Of course, not all parents are supportive of that. And one of my hobbies, which was writing, and led to, in part, me starting Letters to Strangers, was something that my family wasn't very thrilled with. But I think, I still did it because I loved it and it helped me a lot. But I think, as parents who have that sort of ability to choose to support or deny your kids side hobbies, quote unquote, I think that support will always help. Another thing is when like parents are open to I think just listening to what the kid wants to talk about, because oftentimes like I had classmates who could get help on their academic work from their parents, and that could help them alleviate their pressures. But I couldn't do that because my parents didn't speak English and neither of them graduated from college. And so instead, what we did in my household was that I just sort of said whatever the heck I wanted to say. And most of the time, my parents didn't really know what I was talking about. But the fact that they showed an interest in it made me feel like, hey, I kind of know some stuff. So I think giving that little bits of empowerment helped me also feel like, this is a lot of pressure, but it's also pressure that I am happy to deal with if it means I can feel like a sense of growth with it.
So it sounds like your parents' support really helped you a lot.
In certain contexts, yes.
Absolutely. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit more? I heard you talking about your parents not being able to speak English. Can you talk about any challenges that come into that throughout your life when it comes to academics?
Yeah, I mean, with Americans education system, right, you have a lot of parent-teacher conferences, especially earlier on in the schooling career. And my parents usually didn't know what the heck was going on. And so it really sort of fell on me to determine if I was making good progress. And then also when it came to the college application process, we were very confused as first generation immigrants who didn't really know anybody. Up until like my sophomore or junior year of high school, I thought that you couldn't apply to an Ivy League unless you had a recommendation letter from someone who went to that Ivy League school, which is just not true. But like nobody told me otherwise. And I just didn't know what the heck, was going on. So I think there's now more and more resources available online in different languages for these topics, and Google Translate is getting very good. So taking proactive steps to look into that information, I think will be really helpful for future people going through this process.
Great, thank you. Dr. Dingra, I have a question for you. Do you feel that U.S. born children from immigrant families face more academic pressure compared to children from non-immigrant parents?
I think they can, right? For some of the reasons that we're articulating, that immigrants, when they come to this country, often feel that academics is the only way for their children to do well here. I mean, imagine we come here and there's really no sense of networks, strong networks that we have. People who grew up in this country and went to college here, they have their fraternity brothers and sorority sisters. They have an uncle who knows someone to help someone get a job. All these things that a lot of immigrants just don't have. And we know the old adage, right? It's not who you know, it's what you know that matters. But if you don't know that many people, then what you know is what matters. And you have to know more than someone else. So it creates more academic pressure as a result. And studies show that children of immigrants, on average, tend to do better in school than their counterparts who are not children of immigrants. But with that achievement can come extra pressure, mental and social anxieties and stress and real challenges. And this is where our communities often need the most help, right? And the issue is not to forego academic achievement for the sake of mental health. The answer is to pursue academic achievement in a way that does not sacrifice mental health, but by, again, making it more interactive, being in better communication, listening better to our youth, emphasizing hard work and process and effort rather than outcome.
Yeah, super quick note on that. Like another thing for immigrant kids is that like you might come to this country not speaking English very well. Like I had a very thick accent and I didn't know any English when I moved here. And so I had to work extra hard to prove to my teachers and peers to take me seriously. And so academic pressure also becomes a way you have to prove your own worth and legitimacy.
Thank you both for that. And Dr. Dingra, I heard you say a lot about social emotional anxiety. Do you hear a lot of different like mental health conditions or mental health challenges discussed by parents when you talk to them? Are there any common ones that you can share today that you've heard?
Yeah, no, you don't hear them as much discussed by parents because we're not necessarily as aware of the challenges our kids are going through. We don't have a language for it. We're not familiar with it. And we're not comfortable talking about it. But you do hear a lot about this from experts who I talk to as part of the research, and they'll share things around. They'll talk about a kindergartner who is crying in school out of a sense of pressure. Talk about a third grader who's almost nonverbal because they're afraid of just saying the wrong thing. And they're also just exhausted, just tired. Like, because, and the teachers and the health mental experts refer to this as a problem that's stemming from too much expectations on our kids in the home sphere, right? Whether, read this number of minutes, get this extra work done, do this and this, practice this instrument, practice a second instrument, whatever else it might be. And we don't realize where it's adding up because the kid seems fine at home, but at school is where they kind of let loose or aren't acting as their age or grade level would want them to compared to their peers, right? And as parents, we're not aware of this. This is what I'm getting back to earlier. If parents are in better communication with teachers, we can really flesh out who our kids are.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you. And this kind of leads into my question to you, Diana, about what coping trends you've seen within your peers, or even any social emotional challenges as well that you've seen.
Yeah, it's tough because I think there's this culture of, I don't want to say gossip, but kind of similar to that, at least in terms of like saving face and fear of what others might say or make judgments about of your family. That tends to happen a lot across many, I think, adult populations, and you see that pressure sort of trickling down to the kids as well. And so a lot of kids who might otherwise be trying to cope will oftentimes find themselves increasingly competitive with their friends, or the children of their parents' friends, etc., because of that trickle down pressure. So coping ends up becoming, I think, sometimes in a negative sense, in that like people might work extra hard to achieve more academic success to sort of deal with this sort of stress that they're feeling. But then that's not actually solving the root of the issue, it's just exacerbating all of the pressures. I have also seen some other types of unhealthy coping where like people will maybe exaggerate certain elements of their day or their scores, or become extremely protective, or lie about things, just to feel like they are still valid. In terms of more healthy ways of coping, I think people who take on like strategies like, for example, I have a rule with my friends who were in high school where we wouldn't talk about like specific letter grades or specific scores we received on standardized testing. People can always make judgments, but even just avoiding mentioning straight out numbers can help reduce that level of competitiveness. And then also, whenever we do talk about these academic sort of situations, to try to inject another element to the conversation as well that's not academics related. So maybe something about the new movie that came out, etc., just to make things a little bit less intense.
That's really great. I like how you talked about, some negative coping skills or trends that you've seen, but also healthier ways that you can kind of overcome that competitiveness or that protectiveness that you kind of have to validate your feelings if you are, struggling with this academic pressure. Thank you. So I have a question kind of for both of you as we start to wrap up so what are the best ways for loved ones to communicate with their family when they feel overwhelmed by academics in schools?
Okay, so if you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed by academics in schools, frankly, it's very hard to reach out to your parents or others if there's not already a sense of support from them, right? So as parents, let me just say, before I kind of address the question directly, let me say we don't want to get to the stage where there's not already a sense of affection and commitment and support in all ways, in all aspects of life, right? So that has to be there in order for people to come to you us as a parent when they're struggling with their academics or when they're fearful of what we're going to say about them, right? So if we've let our kids play the bagpipes in a rock band, even if we have no idea what that sounds like and understand why it's doing it, right? It's a way of saying we still support you. And that creates more of a connection. So if you are struggling with this and you do want to reach out, keep in mind certain things. That a lot of Asian Americans, many more than we realize, do not go to elite schools, Ivy Leagues, do not go to the big state university in your state, right? They're not at Rutgers, right? A lot of them go through community colleges, for instance. A lot of people have different pathways to getting where they end up. We should focus on the process and on the pathway rather than the destination. And we have to remember that there's not one outcome for all people. And keep in mind that, if you're struggling with something and it seems like the end of the world, like I bombed the SAT or I bombed this big exam, trust me, there are so many people out there who've gone on to have very happy and successful lives who have bombed worse things than you, right? And as parents, it hurts us, it breaks our hearts to see this kind of outcome, but we have to be strong for our kids and communicate that.
Yeah, and I think like on the flip side of that, you also have situations where I've seen like my friends where because of the immigration laws, some of them were only able to immigrate to this country because their parents were very successful or very financially well off back in their home countries. And then that often translated to my friends feeling like they had to live up to like the success that their parents had achieved, or any achievement that they had they gleaned their parents might dismiss and just like, oh well, when I was your age I already did XYZ, or I had to go through XYZ, or things like that. And I think overall it comes down to like a fear of what the parents will say in reaction to you going to them about like social emotional anxieties, etc. And what helps a lot, in at least in my experience, is when a parent is proactive in allowing in allowing vulnerabilities and failures to be talked about in the household. So if a parent volunteers, just randomly anecdotes from their own life about, oh, today at work I totally did this stupid thing, or if they see that their kid is feeling stressed but like the kid doesn't seem to want to open up about it, maybe just being like, I got to tell you, I did like this one test in high school where my teacher literally thought I was like deaf because I just completely blanked out, which is a true story my mom told me. And then we had a good laugh about it. And then it just eased the mood so much that it made me feel more open to being able to talk with her about what I was going through. So I think opening up that level of vulnerable connection by sort of by opening yourself up first as an invitation will help a lot.
Yeah, I really echo that. Opening ourselves up, showing our own flaws, right, our own concerns. And also, one last thing I'll just quickly add is we should be more transparent about why we ask our kids to do certain things. If we say we expect you to do X and Y, right, and that's just a rule in our house, so if you fight against it, we have to explain why, right, and at least give them that much. At least tell them there's the rationale behind this, as opposed to just dictating things, which we can tend to do, right, and not give them the respect of telling them at least what's behind our thinking. And the more we unfold ourselves to our kids, the more they'll unfold to us at these high pressure moments.
You both mentioned very important things, and really, I think, really opening up, right? Encouraging not only parents, but also, kids and students to open up to their parents. And that's the first step in hopefully building that relationship to start the communication pathways, right? And to become more comfortable with communicating with each other about when you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed or any of that. And Diana, are you able to talk about how someone can use letters to strangers also to kind of express themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. So what we do at Letters to Strangers is multifold, but our key program is our writings of letters to strangers as strangers. And these are usually based on therapy-informed themes and guiding questions. And we found that, a lot of times people feel much more comfortable talking about like what they're going through anonymously, but then also when they're addressing it to a stranger and then also receiving a letter back from a stranger, it sort of forces people into this mindset where if you were just writing in a journal, you don't necessarily have an external check on yourself if you start to spiral down negatively. But if you're writing a letter to somebody else, there's like this little bit of feeling like, okay, maybe I'm like rambling about this really terrible feeling, but I feel kind of bad ending the letter like this, almost like you're like watching a movie and it's very unsatisfying when like it just ends in the middle of like an action scene. And so you feel like you should come away with some sort of maybe step forward so that it's not like you're just throwing a bunch of desolation at the reader. And in that process, we're actually also allowing ourselves to become more aware of the steps that we can take to perhaps solve some of these issues that we're going through. And so if people wanted to submit a letter, we have a free online letter exchange platform that's available through our website, letterstostrangers.org. And then there's also other ways to get involved as a full-blown student-run chapter, etc. But anyway, that's the sort of gist of it. We also have a guidebook, which also is free to download in black and white on our website, and it includes some letter writing themes and guiding questions and samples as well.
Thank you so much, Diana. And just to let everyone know, we will have those links and resources available on our website. And one last question for both of you, and then we'll move into Q&A, is, so you both talked about a stigma, you talked about stereotypes. How can we break the stigma? What can we do? What can we do as a community?
Okay, so I'll start, but it won't be a complete answer because that's a big question. That is maybe it's a fundamental question, but it's a big question. Well, I mean, first of all, we have to start celebrating everyone, not just those who are the CEOs or the leading positions or the master chefs or the whatever first chair violinist. We have to recognize that all our stories are worth sharing, and we have to. That's one key thing, because if we don't take pride in all aspects of our community, right, and at least multiple aspects of our community, then we're not going to be solving the problem. We're going to be reproducing the problem, right? So if we want to not just be seen in a singular way, we have to articulate that and embrace all the sides of ourselves that we normally may not, whether it be in terms of the arts, whether it be about our sexuality that doesn't fit a model minority stereotype, whether it be around pathways down the future, right? So we're encouraging these things in a loving and supporting environment, right? That does not mean we're sacrificing or downplaying academics. There's not a zero-sum game, okay? But we can encourage these things as we're attending to the kind of the more traditional things that we care about, and that allows our children to grow up knowing this matters, this academic thing matters, but it doesn't define everything. So I can grow into that while I grow into myself, right? And so it doesn't feel like the child doesn't have to go through the emotional and social stresses that don't just end when you get into college or you finish college. They carry with you, right? They define how you approach your post-college, your work, your family. So we should be attentive to that at a young age, as young as we can, while we're kind of growing out the other parts. That's just a start of an answer.
Yeah, I think I approach stereotypes as like the best way to debunk them is education. A lot of the stereotypes arise from very narrow definitions that were created in specific historical contexts that might have been very racist, and we don't necessarily remember that context when we think about the stereotypes today. So as I myself educated myself more on Asian American history, for example, and I learned about for example, Yuri Kochiyama, who was one of the leading civil rights activists and held Malcolm X in her arms as he died, and and the early Chinatowns of San Francisco, all of this made me realize the richness in our shared diversity, and I think it made me feel a lot more proud of my value, even when people try to use stereotypes against me. And similarly, educating myself on my heritage, I started learning traditional Chinese instrument called erhu when I was in early high school. That's why I left the bagpipes. But anyway, as I learned more about the history of this music, and it just felt so beautiful, and it felt like I was connecting to a history that I hadn't been able to reach because the stereotypes were sort of limiting me. So I think that these different aspects of education can help a lot in validating ourselves beyond the otherwise sort of restrictive nature of stereotypes.
Thank you so much. So it sounds like education is really, really key in helping break that stigma. That's really important. So thank you both so much. I thought this was a very powerful and great conversation that we had. And now I would like to hear from our audience a little bit. So now we'll move into the Q&A segment. So anyone who would like to put a question into the Q&A, we will try our best to get to it in the next 14 minutes. But I will start with the first question. And Diana and Dr. Dingra, it's up to you who wants to take which questions, and I'll target some towards each of you as well. So I would say this is for both of you. So how can educators support our Asian American students now, especially in the light of the most recent attacks since last March?
I can start. I'll just piggyback off of what I said earlier. I think education is so important. Teaching Asian American history in your classrooms will make a huge difference. We are invisibilized because our cultures and our histories is erased from the way people learn about civilization. And also showing documentaries or inviting students to share their different stories and experiences, all of that matters. And then last but not least, I see a lot of educators, even now, like as I'm at Princeton, I have like the dean of my residential college emailing me and be like, Diana, let me know if there's anything we can do to help you. And I'm like, I appreciate it, but I don't really, like, there's not really much you can do to help me, like in this sort of situation. So if there is something that you can offer, be proactive about suggesting it, because it takes a lot of mental like gymnastics to figure out how this specific person can help me in this very different context, etc.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, I mean, there's a time, and I've written about this publicly, like, there's a time for education around this, and it should be more part of our curriculum, which we can do, right? I mean, the federal government can put grants into this and everything else. It's a matter of just priorities. But at this very moment, for our Asian American community, right, for our, our Chinese, Korean, other brothers and sisters who are hurting right now, it's just important, I think, fundamentally, to recognize this is a time of pain. This is a time of fear, right? And we're together in this. And it's also important to realize that, other communities, other racial groups are going through things as well. And there's strength in solidarity. There's strength in community, right? And we're all should be educating ourselves on all kinds of groups and make that a priority. And if it's not happening in the schools, well, there's so much access to information at our fingertips, right? Spend some time educating ourselves around Yuri Kochiyama, Grace Lee Boggs, things that have been going on at the grassroots level, you name it.
Thank you both so much. The next question, are there statistics on stress and mental health issues for Asian Indian children and teens that I can find somewhere? So I would say maybe Dr. Dingra.
Yeah, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I do reference this in the book around what Asian Americans experience, including Indians, experience mental health challenges. They often can be quite severe, and before they get reported. And what that means is we don't seek enough help for our problems when we have them at the low level, and instead we only seek help when they're really extreme, right? Like something like bipolar or schizophrenia, things that are really have real challenges with them. And we need to be better about kind of handling that, but also kind of the lower level mental health challenges that we face. So I don't have the stats off the top of my head. I do refer to them because they are growing. And one last thing I'll say is, I talked to a school mental health expert, and she talks about how at the school level, so this is the national statistics, but in local schools, people will do like an assessment of the students' mental health concerns. And Asian American students, including Indians, oftentimes can be some of the higher stress students in schools.
Yeah, and then also if you're looking for specifically Indian Americans statistics, AAPS statistics tend to be bundled together with like very few PI in that included. But if you specifically Google things like South Asian or say like ethnicity as a keyword, that will often help you generate more results that will be specific to what you're looking for.
Great, thank you both. Another question. So as a parent, sometimes I get questions from other parents about my kids who are going in the direction of non-STEM carrier studies. Can they get proper jobs? Will they be able to support themselves? What do you think is the best way to approach that?
I'll start and just say, yeah, I understand that. And I understand the anxiety where that comes from, because the parents are themselves STEM careers and their whole family may be STEM careers, and that is some of the best paying jobs. But I'll give a quick statistic to tell you that those who major in non-STEM fields 10 years, 20 years down the road have the same income levels as those who majored in STEM fields. There is no one path, right? You can have a very profitable and fulfilling career outside of STEM, whether that be, not everyone who majors in English becomes an English teacher. People major in English and become some of the best lawyers you'll ever meet, right? You can become a philosophy major and go on to, become do consulting, right? There's different pathways, and that's kind of what employers are looking for. Employers want people who went in different pathways to get to similar destinations.
Great, thank you so much. So we have a comment and question. Thank you both for this. Dr. Dingra, Amherst 09 here. Hold on. Without diminishing the personal and professional challenges you both may have faced, you're now in positions that can feel successful to the average immigrant family. What are your thoughts on our definitions of success? And where do you see opportunities to redefine success for immigrants who often give up much for the sake of a narrow version of this particular value?
I guess I can start. Yeah, it's definitely weird since I go to an Ivy League college. But I think ultimately, success it feels weird because when I was growing up, a lot of my parents' friends really sort of shunned me because of my mental illness, and people thought that I wouldn't be able to get anywhere. And so I think what my parents and I have sort of like built up is that my success is not that I'm in an Ivy League college, but that I learned and grew and am in a process of healing from mental illness that others might have sort of really put me down for. And it's that growth process that is the success at the core here. And so I think to redefine these successes, what it comes down to in part is like Dr. Dingra has said before, recognizing the processes behind these successes. So like a 6-figure, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that someone might have putting a lot of extra work in at their job to get promoted. And we might see that same amount of effort at a job that's not 6 figures, but that doesn't make the process any less like commendation worthy. So sort of translating those definitions and extracting the processes out of them, I think then when we apply those metrics, it will feel a lot more embracing and approachable rather than the sort of looming, oh, you must reach XYZ before we can call you successful.
Yeah, I would just add that I challenge people in the audience to do the following, which is the next time you're in a gathering with peers or other parents or professionals, whatever it might be, and you're talking about yourself or talking about your kids, rather than dwelling on the latest achievement, ask questions like, so do you think that you're fulfilled in your work? Do you think that your child is enjoying what they're doing? Do you think that you have a good kind of work-life balance, right? Let's pose different kinds of questions because that helps change the metrics, change the definition of what matters.
That's great. Thank you both so much. We have time for about 2 or 3 more questions. So the next question, as a mentor to a first-generation student, what do you recommend ways to balance in encouraging academics, but also wanting to stress the importance in personal growth and discovery?
For me, the most important thing I learned from this was to do everything to approach academics obliquely or like sideways, by which I mean rather than making academics like the end goal, I'm often like pursuing other goals, and the academics end up becoming like a side effect that happens because of these other goals. So for example, when you're emphasizing the importance in personal growth, that can look like metric of I'm able to be more efficient in the way that I do my homework, or I feel more comfortable in asking for help, things like that. And that will help you grow the personal like sort of situation, but then as a consequence, your academic like will grow as well. So that's kind of how I look at it.
I don't think of it as an either or. So a child who's doing a lot of, let's say, they find a lot of enjoyment out of doing woodworking, you can pick it out, okay? Then a child who's doing a lot of woodworking may really find that first of all, it's a lot of skills involved, cognitive, not just manual. And if I feel good about that, then I feel accomplished, that adds to my sense of self. So now when I'm doing my academics, I carry that over to that realm. And if I'm struggling with academics, at least I know I'm confident in other things. I can be good in this too. These things are connected, right? And so advancing the personal growth will help grow the academics. It's not an obvious one-to-one. They're not always collinear, but they do connect. And we should not see them as somehow mutually exclusive, like I mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. So another question is, any advice to help us parents to make a good choice, the right university or career to our children, or recommending that? There's a lot of stress due to insecurity in making that choice.
Well, firstly, I don't think it's a parent's choice. Maybe that's a little too blunt, but parents tend to think that they have to make all the decisions for their kids, but it's at the end of the way I think of it, and this approach is how I look at mental health as well. Your job is not to be the knight in shining armor who solves the problems for everybody else. And especially if the kid is at an age where they're about to go to college, they are more than capable of making the decision ultimately for themselves. But of course, they might be confused. And your job is more to be a partner on this journey as you walk alongside them while they are figuring out what they need. And so maybe that means asking prompts or questions or discussing things with them. But ultimately, the decision shouldn't feel like it's coming from you forced upon them.
I would actually echo that. I think that in many ways, we are alongside the journey. And I have two kids. I have a high school student. One of my sons is in high school, right? So I think about this in ways that are more, not just academic, they're very personal. And I have to remind myself, this is his journey, right? And when he was younger, I was leading, and now, I'm still leading, but he's kind of catching up, and then soon we'll be co-equals, and pretty soon I'll be kind of tagging along, right? I have to trust that the process is there. And one other thing Diana said, I think is very true, is our job is to make them ask questions. Ask them questions. Why are you thinking this? Why are you think? Why is that? Why do you want to go that direction? Not because we think they're wrong or we have the right answer. We have to make sure that they interrogate themselves, interrogate their options, and then in that process, if it's supportive, they will hopefully come to a decision that's good for them and makes you feel okay.
Absolutely. And I think, there's a lot of insecurity sometimes in children in making a career choice, right? When they're about to enter college, the pressure of having their career goals already in place and having that flexibility to be able to change it throughout their experience, throughout their college careers, stuff like that. So thank you both for your input. So we have about a minute left. So I'm going to ask one final question. How can you approach Indian parents to become aware of mental illness in their children?
So this is true for all kinds of parents, all kinds of people. This is not unique to us as Indians. It is very hard. I want you to know that it's hard. Well-meaning, attentive parents do not always understand what their kids are going through, right? They're on their Snapchat, on their phone, they're doing this, they're on Instagram. We don't really know. We have to be checking in, make ourselves vulnerable to them. Don't just wait for them to be open and confessing their concerns to us, right? Put yourself in their shoes. Take them on a walk. Get them outside the house. Drive them somewhere. I was just driving my son today up to an appointment, and on the way home, we talked more in that half-hour drive than we did all day yesterday, even though I was with them more, because there's just so many distractions, right? We have a very fine house. I mean, in terms of loving, supportive house. Get them out of their routine. Those are some techniques, and I encourage those. I know we're out of time.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly that in the Letters to Strangers guidebook, we talk about this from like a kid's perspective on how to approach your parents if they're a little bit close-minded. But I think a lot of parents feel that way because one, there's like this fear that it could reflect something about themselves, that maybe they failed in their parenting, or maybe like this shows that there's something dishonorable about their family, etc. And it's important to remember that maybe while that could have played a role, at the end of the day, right now, the question is not how your honor is going to be potentially stinged from this, but how your kid needs to heal so that you can all grow together and get better as a family unit, that you're in this partnership together. So sort of shifting that focus is very important. And also taking the time to educate yourself, not just like when you see your kid is in a crisis, but just on a general basis, learning about different mental health things, learning about different sort of social media or other trends that are going on will help you become more cognizant of subtle changes that might otherwise have not been something you would have realized.
Thank you both so much. So thank you everyone for your questions and answers. Before we make some final statements and words, I just wanted to share our NAMI New Jersey website and some resources just so you can know where the copy of this webinar will be as well. So this is our NAMI New Jersey website. We have a couple slides here that have everything that's upcoming, including our current conversation series. If you go to events and you go to webinar series, all right, this is where you will find everything of our webinar series. So right here, as you can see, this is our current conversation. You'll see the YouTube channel, the recorded webinar. There'll be resources like Letters to Strangers and Dr. Dingra's book that he spoke about. And then if you go up here, we also have a calendar. And our online calendar here will show you all of the different events going on throughout the state for support, education. Please bear with me as my computer takes a couple minutes to load. All right, here it is. So this is our calendar. So everything that's coming up, you can look at it as a week, you could look at it as a month, everything like that. So from our education classes, support groups, presentations, everything like that can be found on this calendar, and it's statewide. And then also, just really quick, I wanted to show our online support groups. And we do have statewide online support groups for families and for individuals with lived experience of mental illness, if anyone is interested and in need of support. And what you will find on this link is to register. So you can register here. It talks about our different groups. We also have a couple specialty groups, such as LGBTQ connection group, asylee refugee connection group, a sibling family support group, and a spouse partner family support group. Okay, so I want to take the opportunity to let everyone know to please complete the survey at the end of this webinar so we can incorporate your feedback for future webinars. We would like to thank our sponsor, AmeriGroup, for partnering with us so that we can have these conversations. And thank you, Diana and Dr. Dingra, for sharing this hour with us here today. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. This concludes our webinar.
Thank you.